you'll be a probationary permanent resident person. Okay, first, obviously, that is completely inadequate. Van's starting point is that there should be a pathway to citizenship for everybody. It should be easy, it should be quick, it should be painless, it should not include fines and fees that restrict who is able to take advantage of any of the reforms. It should just be open. And what this proposal is suggesting and leaving open is the possibility that there could be tiers of citizenship, tiers of a hierarchy, a caste system of rights for people based on an elaborate immigration scheme that provides no timelines for how it is, that you go from probationary status to permanent resident to full citizenship, all of that left uncertain, all of that left up to this subjective decision-making by these governors and attorney generals, and that's completely unacceptable. I will say this, however. If this immigration reform is passed exactly as it is now, and millions of people qualify and do come above ground in order to gain this probationary status, first, I think it will be impossible for there to be wholesale or even small numbers of deportations of the people that have gained that status. Because there'll be above ground so many people who will have an interest in fighting against any restrictions on the people who are in that probationary status. People will gain driver's license and social security numbers who are part of that status. And I think it will strengthen the expectations of people. I also think that it is completely unviable to be saying at once to the immigrant populations of this country that you need to rely on the politicians for change, but you're going to be given a status that still doesn't allow you the right to vote. There's going to be a natural push for that status, and the movement will surely be pushing for that status to lead really quickly to full citizenship rights. But we shouldn't have to wait 2, 3, 4 years to get to that point. We have the power, if we organize and come out and start marching and demonstrating again, to win those rights now. And that's what we have to fight to do. The immigration reform package then has some specifics in it and holds a special place for 3 categories of people, one of which is going to be the main subject of the debate and the main unifying point for, I think, both the Democrats and the Republicans. The first group of people that are being proposed to be treated differently are people who do right now qualify for deferred action and would be covered by a DREAM Act. The second group of people is agricultural workers, workers who are migrant workers, who this proposal says are going to gain a pathway to citizenship if this reform is passed. And the third group of people are people who are very, very well educated, people who have masters and PhDs, people who gain masters and PhDs, who are international students from other places. That third category of people also will, according to this proposal, receive special rights in terms of a pathway to citizenship. Well, that obviously excludes the vast majority of undocumented people who don't fit into any of those categories. Let's just start with the sisters and brothers of the people who would qualify right now for deferred action or the DREAM Act. Is it right to deny somebody who's 6 or 7 years old the same rights as their 18 or 19 or 20-year-old sibling because they're too little to be able to make a choice of whether to go into the military or go to college? when they came here under exactly the same circumstances, it seems to me that it is going to be really unviable to treat younger people, little people, who were brought over by their parents separately and differently and maintain the status of being without papers here for those little people if the older siblings are being given some kind of pathway to citizenship. So I think that's the second thing that we could be demanding, is that if there's going to be a special category set up for young people who were brought here by their parents and have been in the United States for some period of time, that should be expanded and stretched to include everybody and not just teenagers and people in their 20s. The second thing that I think is going to be true of the reform, and this is what makes it preposterous to be claiming that this is going to be permanent or lasting, is that as things are set up now, millions and millions of people will have to remain underground, will continue to be undocumented. And under those circumstances, the movement will have to continue to fight, and fight it will. I think we can alter that balance by our mobilization. We have to seize on this opportunity, and we have to use it to restart the movement. It stands before us as a real and great opportunity. If we assume for a minute, based on the press sources or the debate as it's being presented, that any part of this will be granted automatically, that the DREAM Act is sure to come out of it, then we risk the chances of losing anything that might be gained. I don't think we can take anything for granted. We have to be fighting for all of the things that we've been fighting for, including the DREAM Act, right on through this process to have the hope of winning any part of it. I want to take a step in a different direction. There was a period in American history in which second-class citizenship, an inferior status, was assigned to a whole category of people who formally had the rights of citizens. And that was black people in the American South. My entrance into the civil rights movement as a child came from going to those huge demonstrations that occurred in the 1960s to break the back of the old Jim Crow. In the South in America, under the Jim Crow system, even though black people were called citizens, you did not have the right to vote. The means of terrorizing people into subjugation and into accepting that second-class citizenship wasn't the fear of deportation, but it was the fear of being placed on a chain gang or put in a prison, of being tried in a southern court and being found guilty of a crime that was as minor as playing checkers with a white person in a public place, which could end you up in an Alabama jail for 2 or 3 years. In addition to the fear of ending up in jail, there was the fear that came with the terror of regular Ku Klux Klan activities, of hangings, of burnings, of maiming of young black people that stood up against the old Jim Crow. So it was an effective system of subjugation. In 1954, there was a Supreme Court decision called Brown versus Board of Education. And that decision ended Jim Crow segregation. It said, separate can never be equal. It called for the integration of Southern public schools. It said that the reason why separate could never be equal was that the assumption of a society that segregated people into different classes as citizens of this nation, worked from the assumption that some people were worthy and deserved the full resources of this society, while others were inferior, and it didn't make sense for the society to waste its precious resources providing those people, in this case black people, with those same opportunities, that same education, that same possibility of getting a job and an education. It wasn't that separate and unequal was struck down because it was impossible to create an equal educational system for black people and for white people. It wasn't because there weren't attempts being made to elevate the quality of black education so that it might match what was being given to the white people. It wasn't the failure to create equal, it was the assumption that justified why it was necessary to have the separate that brought an end to Jim Crow segregation. That decision was given meaning because there was a civil rights movement, a movement that was led by Dr. King, who fought to make sure that that decision became a reality. That decision was never enforced and would not have been enforced but for the power of the movement. It was the demonstrations, the direct actions of the movement that made it possible for black people to finally gain Voting Rights Acts, to finally gain the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which provided for, at least on a legal basis, the full equality of black and white in this society. The movement was instrumental to breaking the back of the old Jim Crow, and it will be instrumental to breaking the back of this Jim Crow. There's never been a time in American history when the fight for equality has not required the participation and the leadership of young people. It was true in the civil rights movement that shaped me and who I am, and it is still true today. The generation of people that made that fight, my generation, we failed you. We stopped fighting. We shut down the movement. After Dr. King was assassinated, we allowed the movement to dissipate. We pretended that we could achieve equality by elevating a few of us to a few positions in the society that made it seem, at least on the face of things, that the problems of segregation and racism had been solved. But in fact, those problems continued. Our failure to continue to build the movement and fight has left you in the position of not only having to fight for yourselves, but having to fight for us. I'm thinking back on the people that I've known, the people that were part of the movement, and I can't think of a single person who wouldn't be grateful if that fight was restarted again. In the course of the next few months, there's a demonstration that's going to be held in Washington, D.C. on April 10th. It's a demonstration that is being called by the Democrats and by the people that are associated with the Democratic Party. It's something that came out of a call by President Obama for an independent council to be formed, meaning something that was pro-Democratic Party, to press for immigration reform. We're going to need every single young person, old person, every single person to be out at that demonstration, and we're going to need to have a strong, huge, powerful, contingent, a BAM contingent of young people that will be able to intervene in that demonstration to fight for our perspective and our demands to be met. If we have a group of young leaders at that demonstration who are not seeing that demonstration simply as an opportunity to be out with lots of people, which is a great thing in and of itself, and to hear a bunch of politicians make their speeches, but instead see that demonstration as an opportunity to press for our demands. If we have signs saying, pass the Federal Dream Act now, if we have signs saying, full citizenship rights for everyone now, if we have signs saying that we won't accept a hierarchy, a caste system for citizenship in the United States, that it won't be acceptable to us to have some people classified as probationary, some people classified as permanent residents, and some people classified as full citizens with full rights, and the people who are in the bottom two tiers having no clear sense of how it is that you get to the next tier. If we're saying that that is unacceptable, we have a chance to define and change what will take place. This demonstration is something that reflects the arrogance and the confidence of the people in power in this country. Because it is their belief that they can call a mass demonstration not to build the movement, but to shut it down. It is their belief that if they call a mass demonstration and they have a bunch of politicians who are speaking, and those politicians say to the people who come out that they should simply back the politicians and go home and follow the debate on television, then they will have succeeded at shutting down the movement of 2006. We have to use this demonstration to rebuild that independent movement and to make clear to the powers that be that whatever that demonstration in Washington is in their minds, in our minds, it's the beginning. It's the relaunching of a new movement. There was a march called in 1963 by Dr. King in Washington, D.C. at a similar point, a point in which the civil rights movement was fighting for federal legislation that would provide equality for black people and uplift us out of the second-class status that we had been assigned. There was a speech that was made at that rally by Dr. King that is one of the most famous speeches of the 20th century, but it's a speech that is often misunderstood and misrepresented as being a speech that verified and pushed for not just pacifism, and it isn't a pacifist speech, but also for passivity. I want to read a little part of this speech now because I think it's the attitude that we want to be taking to Washington and to every other demonstration that we can participate in and build in the next period of time. So this is from the I Have a Dream speech. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. The note was a promise that all men would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we have come to cash this check. A check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. Now is the time to uplift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment and to underestimate the determination of the Negro. The sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if this nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. That has to be our attitude. The movement in 1963, the movement for black freedom, for equality, had a great advantage because it had a leader of national prominence named Martin Luther King to head that movement and to say at a gathering of hundreds of thousands of civil rights activists in Washington, D.C., that the government should not be assuming that there would be any tranquility, any peace, that what had occurred that summer, uprisings in southern cities, the first riots that began in the 1960s began that summer. Dr. King was the leader of all of that. There is no Dr. King for the immigrant rights movement. And that is an advantage and a disadvantage. It's a disadvantage because it means that the task of leadership is left to those who emerge as leaders now and take up the mantle of speaking for the rights of their people and speaking from the voice of their people. It is an advantage because it means that there's the opportunity to create a broad grouping of young leaders, not just a single leader, but a national leadership, a national cadre of leaders who can pursue the aims of the movement, build local struggles to advance our cause, and make it possible for the immigrant rights movement, the great civil rights movement of this generation, to have the leadership it needs to win. When Dr. King was assassinated, the movement had no leader to replace him. We can create a situation in which we have a collective leadership of young people prepared to fill the void so that if one of us falls, there'll be others who will be able to take up the slack and keep the movement moving forward. That's the moment we're at. Any local struggles that we can get going in the next few months, anything, any local demonstrations, any signs of independent action will have a real and meaningful impact on the course of immigration reform. BAM is in a fight in Los Angeles to save Crenshaw High School, which is known largely in Los Angeles as being one of the last black high schools of Los Angeles. That school is being projected by the school board to be reconstituted and turned into 3 schools, to be broken up. The students at that school are in a fight to keep that school. There are black and Latino students, undocumented students, and students with papers fighting together. If they win that fight, the whole course of the debate around immigrant rights will change, even though the fight to keep that high school united and open as it is not explicitly a fight around immigrant rights. And the reason for that is because all of the politicians and all of the powers that be are convinced that there won't be any more independent actions, that the movement won't stand and fight. And any indications that we can give that that is not true will have a big impact on what we are able to win. So the work that you're doing here at PCC could be really decisive to the outcome of this fight. Having a march in Pasadena, calling for full citizenship rights, calling to open the borders, calling for real equality, calling for immigration reform that makes it possible for everyone to come above ground. A march that's calling for the immediate passage of a full federal DREAM Act. Anything like that can have a big impact on this debate. And so it is so important that you all act. It's not just waiting till that national demonstration. If we can go into that national demonstration as Dr. King went to Washington in 1963 with a movement on its feet already fighting, then what we can achieve from April 10th will be beyond anything that we can imagine achieving now. We created BAM in 1995 because there was a failure of leadership for the civil rights movement and the immigrant rights movement. We felt then, and we feel now, that the job of filling that void would be left to the young people of this nation, and in particular to those people that are directly affected by the course and the direction that this nation takes. It's been true that in the fight for immigrant rights, it's been undocumented students that have been the strongest fighters, the boldest fighters, the most consistent fighters, the people who refuse to sit down and shut up. We need undocumented students and youth. We need the Latino communities to stand up now and make this fight. What is at stake is the future, not just for the people who are immediately affected, but for all of those that live in the United States. And if we win here, for the fights that are taking place all across the world for immigrant rights. What you do matters most. Jose said, talking pretty words is nice, but acting, that's the real ticket. And boy, is that true now. So I really, really hope that we can have some discussion on this, and I hope that this report was helpful. I think that it would be great if we could have United Without Boundaries affiliate to BAM, become a part of BAM as an organization. We're an organization of individuals, but also of groups. And it's important for us now to have a central fighting leadership prepared to move things forward. So I thank you very much for all your time and patience, and look forward to if there are questions or comments or thoughts that people have.
I know that you were one of the only people to do band. Were there times where the struggle got to you, where you thought you couldn't do this anymore, or were you motivated by other people and support systems that you had within this organization?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Okay, so I'm going to say something about myself and it will answer the question. My dad's black. My mom's from India. When she came to this country, it was years and years and years before she could even apply for her permanent residency because her family had been active in the struggle for the liberation of India from British control. And she was considered, therefore, to be a dangerous radical to have on the shores of America, subject to deportation, even though she was married to an American, in what was, in many states of this nation, an illegal marriage, because at that point, marriage between black people and non-black people was illegal. And the two things that were the earliest things that I feel were ingrained in me came from two experiences. First, I had the opportunity to go when I was 2 years old to India and to spend a few years there. And what was so striking to me about India was that despite how poor it was, that there was a life and a vibrancy to the people that was unparalleled by anything that I had ever seen in America. And it convinced me beyond a shadow of a doubt that black and brown are more than equal to white people, and nothing could ever shake me from that conviction. And that's been absolutely central to my maintaining myself as a leader. No one can convince me that there's anything better to do with my life than to make that fight for what I believe to be the deepest truth that I stand on. The second thing that had a really big impact on me was being a part of those big demonstrations, I was never left at home. I was allowed to go to things when I was really little. And when they were arrested, there are a lot of parents that I run into who say that they don't want their parents, and in some of the immigration cases we do, there are parents who say they don't want their kids in immigration court, or they don't want their children participating in sit-ins and stuff like that. And I always say to them, it was the greatest adventure and advance of my life to be a part of that, because it showed me that there was more than the family, that there was a whole community of people that could have your back, that could stand or sit down, we're doing sit-down strikes, with you, that could provide a network and a fabric that could be the real society if we won. And so I would say yes, the having the movement and being a part of the struggle has been very important, but in the end, I think that you have to live your life on the truth. And I saw a lot of people who agreed with me make compromises because it was convenient to pursue a career, to make a lot of money, to pretend that they could be a role model and an example rather than an activist and a fighter for their people. If I had been one of those people, I would have put a bullet through my brain. I can't think of a worse life. So that's me, and you know, people are different, but I think it's really fun. I think it is so great to fight. I enjoy it. I'm an angry person, so I don't mind letting that, letting that all come out. And I feel like I wouldn't, if I had chosen another course, I wouldn't be here speaking to you today. And the fact that I have the privilege of knowing people like Jose, that's a great thing. And that keeps me going.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Yeah.
Well, coming from, I'm a representative of BSA, Black Student Alliance here at PCC, and I know that there is a lot of lack of care in the Black community because the struggle has been dissipated. You know, as you said, that's actually my favorite part of the Martin Luther King speech is what you say. That's the part I talk about the most is the, relaxing now that we got a little freedom and comfort. And I see that every day, you know what I mean? Just basic struggles in the African American community now that people don't care about as much, just because they're not directly affected. And I mean, it goes through all the races and all human beings is not caring enough unless you're directly affected, whether it's being homeless or being, big issues like this, like immigration. And so I was wondering if you had any words on getting people to care more. I know the way I try to get through African Americans to care about issues for our, brown brothers. I'm brown too. You know what I mean? These are my people. You know what I mean? Human beings are my people, and I realize that. And I actually grew up in a Hispanic community, so I wonder if that took a hold of me also, maybe. But I think it's the love just for human beings in general. So the way I approach them about that is through, thinking about my history and where my people have been and knowing my people are also going through a struggle right now, and that's why I care. But I was wondering if you had any words on how we could get more people involved in your experience.
Yeah, I think it's two things. I mean, I think it's, we've made the fight since the founding of BAM for affirmative action, for maintaining access to higher education for Black and Latino, and we've been able to build a movement around that and the defense of public education because it is so central to the interests of the Black community as well as the Latino community, and because it's so under attack now. In the discussion that's going to be coming forward on the immigrant rights reforms, everyone is going to be talking about the necessity to have America open to more high-skilled, educated workers who gain their papers. One of the central, kind of themes of the reform is that we've had a family-based immigration system. And what we need is an economically based immigration system that opens our borders so that we can get, we can raid India and Brazil and China and Korea and have the best and brightest from those nations come here and work. And the reason why that is going to be, why that is such a central theme, is because of what's happened to public education here. The idea that there would be young people born and raised in America who would be able to have access to public education, who would be able to go to a school like this and then go to a Berkeley or a UCLA and then advance to those higher positions, that dream is being extinguished. And it's directly tied to this reform. It's that there's going to be a substitute for rebuilding public education. The more scarce public education has become, the more the standards have shifted to exclude Black and Latino from that scarce resource. And so I think there is that fight to be made. And I think there are other fights like that in Detroit, which is one of the few, majority Black cities left, which is where I'm from. We've done fights around people being evicted from their homes. We've succeeded in stopping evictions. That's been really, really fun, stopping those assholes from coming in and taking things out of people's homes and leaving them homeless after they've lived in a place for 20 or 25 years and the economy took a nosedive and now the bank is going to be able to reclaim their house. Oh, no. So I think there are other struggles to be involved in. But the second thing I would say that I think has been true is that the struggles of 2006 did more to mobilize the Black community, the progressive white community, the Asian community, than anything of the last 2 decades. And when, in the work that we're doing in Crenshaw and some of the Black high schools in LA, it was such an important turning point for the students in those schools when the students from East LA marched to Locke or to Crenshaw And the students in those schools fought to get out. And they fought to be a part of those marches. And they fought because they knew that there was, that their interests were intrinsically bound up with the interests of those Latino students. For many, many people that I've talked to since then, they were Latino students who said, we never went to South Central. That was our first time out of East LA. We didn't even know what was there. For students from South Central, it was like, yeah, South Central is much more integrated than East LA. So most of the people have had experiences, you know, working, fighting, going to school with their Latino peers. But the fact of being able to be a part of this movement, which they had never been a part of before, was really invigorating. And I think if we're building a movement for immigrant rights, there's going to become a new emergence of the Black civil rights movement as well. Because once you put the question of equality on the table, then everybody wants a piece of the action, and they should.
Thank you.
To get more information about the Crenshaw School, is BAM.com probably the best spot to go?
Yeah, it is, thank you. And we, you know, and Hoku and Jose are, you know, our two leading LA organizers, so please grab them afterwards if there's any of this that you want to be involved in. Thank you, Matt. And we will be building this contingent for April 10th. I feel like this. Okay, there may be a march in Los Angeles, and there may be one in the Bay Area, West Coast marches. It seems to me that that's likely. But I don't see any reason in the world why organizations like your organization should be kept out of the big march in Washington. There are unions, there are churches, there are community groups that ought to be donating money and chartering planes to bring young people from Los Angeles to that march, because Los Angeles is the center of the fight. And what happens here is everything. So I think we just have to start building for that. We can't think small. We feel the weight of our oppression so heavily that a lot of the times it wears us down and it makes us too humble instead of being bold. And now is the time to be bold. Now is the time to fight for those resources that we deserve to rebuild this movement. I think we can get them. I think we can get them from here. Yeah.
Will you be participating in March in March?
I sure will, yeah.
We'll see you there.
Yeah. I mean, we're gonna, you know, we did a march in 2003 that BAM organized in Washington that was in defense of affirmative action, and it was on a Tuesday, and it was 50,000 young people from all across the country that made it to that march, and it was the largest weekday march as of that point, because it was before 2006, of young people that had ever happened in American history. So I know that this is possible to do. There was a group of students that came from Houston, and it was one young Latino high school student that organized the contingent from there. And he went to a black church called the Shrine of the Black Madonna and invited them to be a part of it. And together, they raised the money for 3 buses to come from Houston. And they didn't have food. They just, you know, they put everything into getting those buses, and they got there. And this has to be that kind of grassroots movement. Okay, I'll just say one thing on this. I know PCC is saying they're going to send 200 people or some big number of people, right, up to Sacramento for what has become the yearly ritual of students gathering in Sacramento to pay homage to Jerry Brown, even though that's not how it's presented. That is what it is, to gather up, have some speeches, come home, and then Brown and the legislature get to decide what the budget is going to be. Seems to me that that money would be far better spent sending a contingent of people from here to Washington. And we ought to be fighting for that, because that could actually make a difference. It's not just gonna be symbolic, it's gonna be real. If we make it real, and if you guys are there, we'll make it real. We're gonna have people in Washington organizing before the march. There's some high school students that have already gotten in touch with us from Washington who wanna see about organizing walkouts. There are students from Howard University that are really looking forward to organizing for this. This could be really fun. And if we get those walkouts leading up to that march is gonna be, the drug of tranquility will not be a problem for us. Other questions? My answers are always so long, makes people scared to ask a question.
Well, you mentioned something about 200 plus students for the Jerry Brown thing. How are we, or who do we talk to directly in order to direct those funds to these smaller groups that are actually motivated to go to participate in the March?
Yeah.
That'd be something that I'm very interested in doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question, and I think that these, traditionally, the university administrations provide the money, both from the CSUs and from the community colleges, to send people to this yearly march. So I think we would want to go with a resolution to whatever the student government is, but I think we have to lay that demand probably directly on the administration, and it's going to be a fight to get it. But it's a fight that will awaken this campus and this community to the seriousness of the students here fighting for their rights.
Thank
You know, I haven't set up, thank you, saved me from blabbing, thank you.
Do you work with any other national organizations?
We work with any national organization that will work with us. And that sometimes that's a lot of groups, and sometimes it's no other group. And it really depends on the situation. We won a case in Michigan around overturning the ban on affirmative action in Michigan. And we want to take this case to the Supreme Court because we want to overturn the ban nationally. We want to free California and free the young people of California up to be able to go to the best universities in this state. And every organization that worked with us in 2003, the ACLU, the NAACP, all of them are opposed to this case advancing to the Supreme Court. And what they're saying is, well, what do we care? We've won it for Michigan. You know, let California make their own fight. And that's just completely ridiculous. So in this fight, we're standing alone. In 2003, all of those people signed up to help build the march to defend affirmative action. It really has just been so, what the other organizations do has been really dependent on, you know, the winds and the moods of the Democratic Party.
You have the exact date when and where is the march?
Yeah, it's on April 10th, and it's at noon. Yeah, I assume that it's going to be like an assembly on the mall in Washington, and then maybe a march to the Lincoln Memorial. Whether or not there's a march even, I think is going to be dependent on whether there's, what kind of contingents are there.
Anyone around the day?
I haven't heard of anything in LA, but I honestly, I would be really surprised if there is not something in LA. You know, as momentum for this builds, I think there will be an LA march. And if nobody